The last time Lotus was written on the side of an F1 car was 2015, and since then everything's gone a bit quiet. The last time they'd released a new road car was 2008, and while they continued to sell slight variations of the Elise, Exige and Evora, it certainly looked like the brand was on the way out. They were selling less than 1,000 cars a year, and in some years that number was less than 500. But then, in June of 2017, Chinese car company Geely bought a majority stake in Lotus for an estimated £2 billion. This was a lot of money for a brand that had been quiet for over 12 years, so Geely clearly had big plans for it. And stage one of that big plan was to make some cars. On the 16th of July 2019, Lotus revealed the Evija. The name translates as the living one, and it represents a rebirth for the brand. The Evija produces 2,000 horsepower from 4 electric motors. It will go from standstill to 60 miles an hour in significantly less than 3 seconds, and it'll get to 186 miles per hour in under 9 seconds. That's 2 seconds faster than the Koenigsegg Riera. Only 132 Evijas will ever be built, and they've all sold out. Lotus charged £1.7 million for each one of these, but for the most powerful production car in the world, I think the price tag is justified. And then 2 years later, Lotus revealed the Emira. The design of the Emira clearly takes inspiration from its older brother, but instead of being pushed forwards by electric motors, the Emira is powered by a combustion engine. The engine in question is a 3.5 litre supercharged V6, and it will also be available in the future with a 2 litre inline-4 from the Mercedes A45. Lotus has stated that the Emira will be its last ever combustion car, with the brand heading in the direction of electricity. Simplify, then add lightness. Those were the words of Colin Chapman, Lotus's founder. But with creature comforts like Apple CarPlay and a digital dashboard and a curb weight of nearly 1,500 kilograms, the Emira is neither simple nor light. But does it need to be? Lotus is clearly moving away from making stripped-back sports cars, and it's instead trying to build a reputation for making cars that are both excellent to drive and easy to live with. It's a proven formula within the automotive world. Porsche, Mini and Alfa Romeo are all examples of brands who have built themselves around that very philosophy. It's hard to find a fault with the Emira. It looks great, sounds great, drives like a proper Lotus, and it's even pretty good on fuel. And at a starting price of around £70,000, it's cheap enough that a significant amount of people will have the money for one. However, for Lotus to sell as many Emiras as I think they could, they need stage 2 of Geely's big plan: marketing. In March 2022, Group Lotus hired Kai Li as a social media executive. 3 months later, the brand appeared on TikTok with a fairly simple cinematic video that announced they were on TikTok. Pretty standard stuff for a brand. 2 videos later, Lotus got a comment saying the brand's name spelt out lots of trouble, usually serious. Upon receiving a comment like this, any other corporate social media admin would have probably deleted it and hoped nobody had seen it. But instead of doing that, Kai simply responded, "Lol." I think there's something really refreshing about seeing a brand on social media that actually makes an effort to cater to the people who consume their content. It's so different to the standard way of doing things, which is to push out a whole load of marketing material and hope a few people see it. Adverts are boring, so why would someone open TikTok and want to watch them? Kai realized that if you want to gain a following on TikTok, then you have to make stuff that people want to watch. He made videos based on trends, and as a result, Lotus cars have 1.5 million followers on TikTok after just 6 months of being on the platform. Of course, most of these followers aren't going to be in a position to buy a Lotus, but if just 0.01% of them went on to buy a Lotus Emira, then Lotus will make around £10 million in revenue. And assuming that it makes £10,000 profit per car, it'll make 1.5 million just from TikTok. But if you really want to sell cars, then TikTok isn't the right place to be. You can run ads on YouTube like the one I keep seeing for the Dacia Duster, or you could put one of your cars in a shopping center where lots of people will walk past it. Both of those strategies are more likely to sell cars than TikTok, but there's one thing that Lotus could do that they haven't done since 2015. They could race in Formula 1. Lotus have a rich history in Formula 1, and it sits 5th in the all-time list for team success in the sport, behind only Mercedes, McLaren, Ferrari and Williams. Racing is part of Lotus's brand, and to explain this, we're going to need a little history lesson. Lotus Engineering Limited was established in 1952 in North London. Just 1 year later, Lotus released the Mark VI, which was its first ever road car. By 1955, Lotus had sold 100 of these, and they were a common sight on the racetracks of Britain, frequently beating much more expensive and powerful cars thanks to their excellent handling. Just 1 year after the release of the Mark VI came the Mark VIII, which weighed less than 500 kilograms and boasted an aerodynamic design, making it capable of 125 miles per hour. The Mark VIII was also a very successful racing car, beating out Porsche at Silverstone in 1954. Lotus's first Formula 1 entry came in 1958 through its sister company, Team Lotus. Its first victory came just 3 years later at the 1961 US Grand Prix, and then just 2 years after that, Jim Clark took 7 wins in the season on his way to a world championship. Lotus and Clark narrowly missed out on a title in 1964, before dominating again in 1965 on their way to the second. Held back by a poor engine in 1966, Lotus took just one win in the US Grand Prix. But in 1967, despite not winning the title, they were dominating at the end of the season. Jim Clark would take his last ever win in the 1968 South African Grand Prix, with Graham Hill making it a Lotus 1-2. Clark tragically died in a Formula 2 race at the Hockenheimring while driving the Lotus 48. After Graham Hill picked up where Clark had left off for Lotus's third championship, the team moved into the factory it still uses today in Hethel. The site was originally an airbase, and so Lotus converted the runways into a testing facility for both its road cars and race cars. Without the success in Formula 1, this move would not have been feasible. In 1970, Lotus came up with a revolutionary new car, the 72. It's arguably one of the most iconic Formula 1 cars in history, and in its 75 Formula 1 entries, it took 3 Constructors' Championships and 2 Drivers' Championships. Thanks to its longevity, it is one of the most successful Formula 1 cars ever. The 72 was retired in 1975 and replaced by the Lotus 77, which was not nearly as successful, but it still took P1 in the final race of the 1976 season. Mario Andretti proclaimed the car to be a dog, and so it was scrapped for the following season and replaced by the 78. The 78 is an incredibly noteworthy Formula 1 car, as it's the first ever Formula 1 car to use the ground effect. Ground effect was discovered almost by accident when Peter Wright put a prototype model on the rolling road and noticed that as the speed increased, the car was being drawn closer towards the ground. He then experimented by placing pieces of cardboard as seals on either side of the underbody, and the level of downforce created was nothing short of incredible. Colin Chapman knew how special this innovation was, and so despite it being ready halfway through the 1976 season, he insisted it didn't debut until 1977, for fear of the other teams copying the idea. Were it not for a string of retirements in the latter half of 77, the 78 would surely have dominated the championship. However, the best was yet to come. After winning 2 of the first 5 races in 1978, the Lotus 78 was replaced by the 79, which took back-to-back wins in its first 2 races. The 79 is regarded to be the first F1 car to take full advantage of ground effect, and it was arguably one of the most dominant cars in Formula 1 history. It was in contention for the win in all but 1 race in the season, which is a feat not even Mercedes could manage with the W11. Colin Chapman passed away in 1982, aged 54, but he'd been alive to see all of Lotus's 7 championships. On the 13th of February 1995, Team Lotus was summoned to court with a sworn statement of affairs showing that the company owed more than £12 million. Peter Collins and Peter Wright were both disqualified from being the directors of Team Lotus for 9 and 7 years respectively. Team Lotus laid off its staff in December 1994, and the development of the new car would be halted. The Lotus name returned to F1 in 2010, but confusingly, this was not Lotus. Lightspeed had acquired the right to enter the F1 Championship under the Lotus name. However, the real Lotus made it clear that they would be taking action to protect its reputation if need be. Following the Crashgate scandal that came to light in 2009, Renault decided to scale back their involvement in Formula 1, and from this came Lotus Renault GP. This was the real Lotus's entry, however initially it was just a sponsorship agreement. In 2012, Lotus Renault became known as Lotus F1 Team, and Renault were just the engine supplier. In its first season as just Lotus, the team took a race win and finished 4th in the standings. For 2012, the team hired Kimi Räikkönen, and his contract contained the infamous performance clause that almost bankrupted the team. He was promised €50,000 per point he scored, and after scoring 390 of them in his time with the team, his bonus alone came to almost 20 million. In 2015, the team started to fall apart though, and the personnel found themselves locked out of the hospitality unit following unpaid bills at the Japanese Grand Prix. Renault then had to bail the team out following it falling behind on tax payments, and ultimately Renault bought the team back from Lotus for the 2016 season. Around 40% of F1 fans follow at least one brand on social media based purely on their sponsorship of an F1 team. This is affected mostly by what the sponsors post on social media, and with Lotus's unique attitude to social media, it would be fair to assume they'll be one of the more popular brands in F1 based purely on following. But as I've already mentioned, a following doesn't necessarily make money. Sure, content can be monetized on platforms like this one, but a few $1,000s here and there from ad revenue isn't going to make F1 sponsorship worth it. In the same way that not uploading to a YouTube channel for a while causes the next video to perform badly, not releasing a new car for 6 years must have hurt Lotus. It is essentially starting from scratch again, and so you'd be forgiven for not being aware Lotus was still making cars. So how do Lotus fix it with Formula 1? Well, for a sports car manufacturer, Formula 1 is the perfect form of advertising. The people that will buy Lotus's cars are also likely to be Formula 1 fans, so a successful Formula 1 entry could be crucial for Lotus to expand the business. There are 3 clear options to enter F1. Either Lotus finds a team to sponsor, it buys an existing team, or it sets up a new one. Setting up a new team will incur an instant cost of $300 million from the FIA, plus a huge investment into a factory and everything else that's necessary to run a Formula 1 team, so even with Geely's deep pockets, this seems like a bad idea, and one that would take years to execute. The next option would be to take over an existing team. If Lotus were targeting an entry in 2026, just like Audi are doing with Sauber, then it should be looking around now for a team to buy. Williams seems like the logical place to start, as the team has had yet another horrible season, and with the surprise loss of its team principal as the final blow, Dorilton Capital must be looking for a way to cut their losses, namely a sale of the team. This isn't to say that Dorilton are going to sell, of course. There could well be a strong plan in place to rebuild the team to its former glory, but if Lotus were looking for a way into the sport, Williams would surely be one of the cheaper ones. Buying the Williams team would give Lotus access to all the infrastructure already in place. The Williams factory in Grove has all the equipment necessary to build F1 cars right away, and buying a team would eliminate the cost of recruiting a whole new team of staff. Lotus's previous F1 entry was done in this way, after buying a stake in the Renault F1 team, and although it's easy to only remember the poor results at the end of Lotus Renault's time in F1, it was actually quite a successful period. The final option for Lotus to return to F1 is by far the lowest risk one. It could simply sponsor an existing team. Lotus already has connections with Alpine thanks to the two announcing they'll be working together on an electric sports car in the future, so a sponsorship deal with Alpine could make sense for both parties. Lotus especially could gain a lot from it, as they will have a risk-free way of showing the world that they're not dead. And that's all that Lotus really needs from F1. It would be contradictory for the brand to be seen producing F1 cars when it appears to be so determined to only make electric ones. So a title sponsorship of a team would allow it to enjoy all the marketing benefits that it would by owning the team, with the extra benefit of being able to pull the plug when it sees fit. And with huge amounts of money on tap from Geely, Lotus could sponsor a team from tomorrow if it really wanted to. But they won't. Lotus has done just as much work for other manufacturers as it has for itself. Cars like the Vauxhall VX220, Kia Soul, Nissan GT-R, Chevy Corvette and the Tesla Roadster have all been developed with some help from Lotus's engineering department. In both of its stints in Formula 1, Lotus was a force to be reckoned with. It was let down twice by its financial situation, but with Geely's money acting as a safety net, Lotus has a perfect opportunity to return to the top of motorsport. If Lotus wants to return to F1, then surely it will be in 2026, and it will most likely come from a buyout of Williams. It won't be an easy task, but when has Lotus ever done something that seems easy? Oh, and one more thing. Do you remember this? It's called the Lotus T125, or the Exos. And it was a horrible, horrible failure. Lotus made it in the likeness of an F1 car, and to nobody's surprise, they didn't sell a single one. Nobody wanted to buy a track car that was as difficult to drive as an F1 car, and the people who did probably didn't have enough money. If Lotus were to return to F1, they obviously wouldn't even consider making a track car similar to today's F1 cars. But wouldn't it be cool if they did?